My daughter-in-law snapped at me across the living room. "Stop breathing so loud, you're annoying everyone." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She laughed, sure I wouldn't dare speak up. By the next month, my name would be off the joint account, and hers off the deed. I'd spent years keeping a roof over their heads. Now that roof was no longer hers to claim. And when the mortgage bill came, the silence would answer for me. "We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe." The towel in my hand smelled like sun and detergent when the words knifed across the room. "Stop breathing so loud, you're annoying everyone." Sam didn't raise her voice. She never had to. She just pitched it cool and flat, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis. "You are the problem in this house." She stood by the open arch to the kitchen, one hip against the doorway, phone in her palm like a badge. The box fan hummed in the corner, pushing air that was too heavy to bother with, and the afternoon light leaned through the living room windows, turning the dust into little slow comets. Ethan froze with a fork halfway to his mouth. He was eating at the edge of the couch again instead of the table, shoulders rounded, eyes locked on the muted game highlights. He didn't turn. He didn't have to. I could see the way his neck tightened above his collar like he was bracing for a wave. My breath stalled. Just a beat. I put the towel in the basket and smoothed the top sheet of folded things, like what needed quieting here was fabric. The wraparound porch creaked as a runner went past on Whitaker Street. A trolley bell dinged 3 blocks over. There was Savannah carrying on. "Did you hear me?" Sam added, sounding bored, not angry. Her nails tapped her phone. Tap, tap, tap. "I did," I said. My voice came out soft. I had learned after decades of bedside manner how to keep it soft even when hurt. "I'll step outside." "You're not the only one who lives here," she said, as if giving me a favor by clarifying it. "We need basic courtesy." Ethan took that moment to stand and collect his plate, like he'd finished anyway. He ghosted into the kitchen, keeping his head ducked and his body a polite sidestep away from us both, as if he might collide with a question. The fork clinked, water ran, cabinet shut. The choreography of a man who survived by not bumping things. I slid the laundry basket onto the coffee table. The wicker rasped. My hands were steady. "I'll finish this later," I said, to nobody in particular. I picked up the basket again and carried it down the hall to my room under the stairs, the one with the narrow window and the blue quilt, the one that hadn't changed much since Robert died. The hallway smelled like lemon oil and old pine. My breath, quiet now, moved in and out like tide on a windless day. On my dresser, a small photo of Ethan at 12, a crooked grin, scraped knee, freckles he outgrew. I set the basket down and closed the door. Behind it, the house made its familiar Sunday sounds. Sam's laugh as she scrolled, Ethan's shoes stilling, the fan taking long, unambitious turns. I stood still and listened. Then I did what I do when I'm angry and can't afford the luxury of a scene. I made tea. By the time the kettle clicked off and the peppermint bag bled green into my favorite mug, the street was orange with late light. I stepped onto the porch with my cup and let the air do its best. Spanish moss swayed in the oaks along the block like somebody's slow, secret handshake. A couple with a stroller drifted past, and the baby blew an aimless raspberry at the world. I could have laughed. I didn't. Ruth saw me before she turned up the walkway. I could tell by the way her hand lifted, fingers splayed, the "I see you" wave that had gotten us to and through so many storms. Her gray bob was tucked behind one ear, and she wore the same sensible sandals she'd worn since retirement, the ones she swore had saved her knees. "You look like you just swallowed a lemon seed," she said, planting a kiss on my cheek. "And don't tell me it's the heat. Savannah's always been rude about that." "It's not the heat," I said. The porch swing creaked as we sat. I handed her the extra mug I'd made as if I'd known she'd come. Maybe I had known. After enough years, a friend is a barometer. She sniffed. "Peppermint, so not a celebration?" "No," I said. Out on the sidewalk, 2 girls rode lime green bikes and sang the chorus of something tinny and bright. "It isn't." Ruth didn't rush me. She never did. We watched a dog and his owner negotiate the hydrangea bush. A dragonfly stitched nothing to nothing over the lawn. She told me to stop breathing, I said finally. Ruth's head turned, slow. Who? Sam, in the living room. The fan was on. I smiled a thin, tired smile. Maybe it amplified me. Ruth's mouth pressed into a line. Ah. And Ethan? She asked after a beat. Went as quiet as a church. I took a sip and let the mint scorch my tongue a little. I carried the basket to my room and I made tea. That's civilized, Ruth said. She squeezed my hand. Her palm was warm and dry, nails square. I'm going to say 3 sentences and you can ignore them if this isn't the day. Go on then. 1. You don't have to fold a damn thing for people who ask you not to breathe. 2. You own half this house. 3. There's more than one way to make a point. I looked at the streetlights coming on down the block like a string of patient candles. A breeze lifted the damp hair at my nape. Somewhere a saxophone complained luxuriously. I know what I'm worth, Ruth, I said, and surprised myself by hearing how flat it sounded. Worth didn't always translate to the rent people paid you in respect. Ruth leaned back, mug balanced on her knee. Do you? I studied the porch railing, the places the paint had bubbled last summer and I'd scraped and repainted while they were at the beach. My hands remembered the shape of that work. Inside, something fell. A cupboard banged. Sam's voice spiked, then cut off, like she'd remembered herself. My name hovered in the air and then dissolved. You don't have to tell me now, Ruth said softly, but if you wanted to talk, mechanics, I know the bones of your mortgage better than most people know their own birthdays. You've been making your share on time for how long? 15 years? If a person wanted leverage, I'm not saying you do. She took another sip, eye on me. I'm saying I brought my reading glasses. I let the tea cool in my hands. It smelled like the herb garden I'd kept alive through drought. A trolley sighed past toward the park, its windows full of people who had never been in my kitchen. I don't like a scene, I said, but I don't like being erased either. Ruth's smile was small and fierce. Then let's write your name where it shows. The front door opened. Ethan stepped out, shoulders hunched as if the night might notice. He glanced at us, at my teacup, at the space beside me that would not fit him. Mom, he said quietly, Sam, she didn't mean... I heard what she meant, I said, not unkindly. He swallowed, eyes darting to Ruth and back. Can we talk later? We will, I said. I let him off the hook because I was tired of watching him dangle from it. He nodded and retreated like a tide giving up on the shore. Ruth set her mug down and looked at me with the expression she wore when a client thought they had no options. It had made men in suits sit up straighter. Helen, she said, voice as even as the planks under our feet, do you still keep your mortgage statements in that floral file box under the bed? The night insects started up all at once, a high electrical chorus. I could feel my answer rising like breath. Helen didn't answer Ruth right away. She went inside instead, the screen door slapping shut behind her, and walked straight to her room. The air was cooler here, faint with lavender sachet from a drawer I hadn't opened in weeks. I knelt beside the bed, eased out the floral file box, and set it on the quilt. The lid stuck for a second, paper swelling in the August damp, and then gave way with a papery sigh. The statements were still in neat chronological order, each month stacked on the one before, my handwriting in the margins noting paid with the date and check number. The ink changed over the years, blue ballpoint to black gel to the thin rollerball I use now, but my signature stayed the same, looping and careful. And there it was, right at the top of every page. Borrowers, Ethan Gardner, Helen Gardner. No Sam, never Sam. The paper crackled as I set the newest statement aside. The balance was lower than I'd remembered. Interest had been eating less of the payment these past few years. I'd been proud of that, quietly, the way you're proud of a garden no one else notices. The floorboards outside my door groaned, then stilled. I didn't look up. By the time I stepped back onto the porch, the file box was tucked under my arm. Ruth's eyebrows lifted in a slow arc. I see you've decided to bring the gospel, she said. We moved inside, to the kitchen table where the overhead light was yellow and blunt. Ruth pulled the top statement toward her, reading it like it might confess a sin. "You know," she said after a moment, "without your half of this payment, that account goes belly up faster than a mayfly in August. There's no cushion here. You stop paying, Ethan can't carry it, and Sam, well, she's not on the loan. Legally, she's got no standing to stop a sale." I traced the edge of the paper with my fingertip. "You're sure?" Ruth's smile was the kind you only get after 30 years in banking, and not one missed clause. "Honey, I could quote the default section from memory." Still, I wanted more than Ruth's word. Which is why, 2 mornings later, I found myself in Martin Shaw's office, the air thick with lemon polish and old law books. He adjusted his glasses, flipped through the statements, and leaned back in his chair. "You have every legal right to sell your share," he said. "Given your joint tenants with right of survivorship, if you withdraw financial support and pursue partition, the court would almost certainly order a sale of the property, especially since your co-borrower can't shoulder the debt alone." "And Sam?" I asked. "Sam," he said with the faintest curl of distaste, "is a resident by permission. That permission can be revoked." He slid the papers back across the desk. "If you want to move forward, I can draft a notice of intent to sell." I nodded, but my hands stayed still in my lap. The last time I'd seen this much paper tied to the house, the situation had been very different. It was 7 years ago, a month after Robert's funeral. Ethan's voice on the phone had been strained. "Mom, I don't know if we're going to make the payment this month." Sam was in the background saying something about student loans. I'd driven to the bank that afternoon, cut a cashier's check from the savings Robert and I had built over 35 years, and slid it across the counter like I was buying back the walls that had held my son's childhood. That payment, and the dozen I made after, kept the bank from taking the place. Ethan had hugged me in the driveway, whispered, "You saved us," and Sam had nodded without meeting my eyes. I never asked for thanks. But I also never imagined I'd be told, in my own living room, to stop breathing. Back home that night, I put the file box back under the bed. The house was quiet except for the tick of the ceiling fan and the faint staccato of someone typing upstairs. I sat at my desk and, out of habit, opened my laptop. The first thing that popped up was Sam's latest post on Facebook, a wide shot of the porch with geraniums blooming in the rail planters I'd bought. "Love making our home so cozy," the caption read, followed by a string of heart emojis. Our home. I stared at the screen until the light from it blurred. The sound of my own breathing was steady in my ears, measured. I closed the laptop with care, the way you'd shut a door before locking it for the night. Somewhere in the quiet, the next step was already forming. The bank smelled faintly of fresh ink and carpet cleaner, the kind of sterile scent that always made me think of beginnings and endings. Ruth was already there, perched in a chair by the frosted glass door, a manila folder balanced on her knee like it was an extension of her. She greeted me with a glance that said, "We're doing this," then ushered me toward a private office tucked in the corner. The loan officer, a young woman with sharp eyeliner and the polite briskness of someone who had 5 more appointments behind us, clicked through her screen, asked for my ID, and began typing. Numbers bloomed across the monitor in neat green lines. Ruth leaned forward, her fingers laced, the posture of someone who could sniff out bad terms before they were spoken. "Check current market value against their original appraisal," she said almost absently, but the girl obeyed. When the figure appeared, I had to blink. The house, our house, was worth nearly double what Robert and I had paid for it when Ethan was still in high school. A tide of quiet possibilities rolled through me, slow and deliberate. "That's before repairs or upgrades," the officer added, glancing at Ruth. "It's in good shape?" I nodded. "Better than most on the block." Ruth smiled like a cat that had found a patch of sun. "Then you're sitting on equity people would trip over themselves to grab." It was only a few minutes later, standing just outside in the soft glare of a late-morning Savannah sun, that Ruth's phone buzzed. She read the message, then looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "I know someone who's been looking for exactly this kind of property. Cash in hand, no financing delays. Interested?" "Tell me about him," I said. Wes Coleman, she replied. Buys up well-kept homes in this area, flips some, keeps others as rentals. He's not one of those slick sharks. You'd like him. He moves fast, but he pays fair. I should have said I needed time. Instead, I heard myself say, "Give him my number." By the time I got home, there was a voicemail waiting, a warm baritone introducing himself as Wes, noting he'd already spoken to Ruth and asking if I'd consider letting him walk through the place before he made an offer. "No obligation," he'd added. "Just want to see the bones." I called him back from the porch, the cicadas droning like a low, endless drum roll. He suggested the next afternoon, but I told him it would have to be Friday after lunch. That was when Sam left for her weekly Pilates class and coffee with friends. We agreed on 2:00. Friday came hot and unhurried. I busied myself in the kitchen, slicing lemons for a pitcher of iced tea while the grandfather clock in the hall inched toward the hour. The air in the house held that faint metallic stillness it sometimes did before a storm. When Wes pulled up, it was in a dent-free pickup with the name of his property firm stenciled neatly on the side. He was tall, with the kind of easy posture that made you think of old baseball photos, and his handshake was firm but not performative. We walked through the bungalow room by room. He noted the condition of the hardwood floors, the clean lines of the crown molding, the way the light slanted across the dining room table at midday. "She's been taken care of," he said, and I realized he meant by you. On the porch, he paused, taking in the view of the park's oaks swaying in the heat shimmer. "I'll be in touch with an offer," he said, and something about his tone told me it wouldn't be low. As I walked him back to his truck, Ethan's sedan turned into the driveway. He rolled down the window, gave me a small, absent wave, the kind you give a neighbor you don't know well, and pulled in behind Wes's pickup. He didn't ask who Wes was, didn't even look curious. I, on the other hand, felt the first cool edge of the plan taking shape. And for the first time in weeks, my breath came easy. The dining room table was set the way Sam liked it. Plates fanned just so, silverware lined up like soldiers, a vase of sunflowers in the center trying too hard to cheer the space. I took my usual seat at the far end, where I could see the porch light glow against the dark. Ruth sat to my right, invited under the pretense of company, but really because I'd asked her to be there. Ethan was across from me, shoulders curled over his plate like he was shielding it from the world. Sam emerged from the kitchen with the serving dish, her smile taut and practiced. She set the roast chicken down, then settled into her chair with the confidence of someone who believed every gesture she made was the correct one. "I made extra," she said, carving into the breast. "I know how much you like your chicken well done, Helen." The emphasis was slight but deliberate, the kind of barb you'd miss if you weren't trained in subtext. I reached for the salad bowl instead. "You're very thoughtful." She laughed under her breath. "Well, I try. Some people get stuck in their old habits. Same meals, same furniture, same everything." Her eyes flicked toward the sideboard I'd brought from my first house with Robert, its wood still gleaming after 40 years. "Guess I like to keep things fresh." Ethan chewed in silence, gaze fixed on his plate. He was wearing that expression again, the one that suggested he was somewhere else entirely. I wondered if he even heard her. I speared a tomato, kept my voice light. "Tradition has its uses. Things that last tend to be worth keeping." Across the table, Ruth smoothed her napkin over her lap, the picture of neutrality. Her foot brushed mine beneath the table, our quiet signal, and when I glanced down, her hand was sliding an envelope across the tablecloth, its corner pressing lightly into my palm. I caught it under my napkin without breaking eye contact with Sam. Sam saw. Of course she did. Her gaze flickered, sharp with curiosity, but she didn't ask. Not here. Not while the chicken steamed, and the clink of cutlery filled the pauses between us. The conversation drifted, Ruth remarking on the weather, Ethan murmuring something about a new client at work, Sam steering it toward a friend's vacation home on Hilton Head. I answered where politeness demanded, my tone steady, my smile fixed in place. The envelope lay warm against my thigh, heavy in a way paper shouldn't be. At one point, Sam offered me more potatoes without looking directly at me, the edge in her voice softened for Ethan's benefit. I declined, thanked her, and let the moment pass. Ruth sipped her water, eyes steady on me over the rim of the glass. Her presence was an anchor, quiet, firm, reminding me that the plan had already begun to move, even if no one else at the table knew it. When dinner ended, Ethan excused himself early, muttering about an email he had to send. Sam began clearing plates, stacking them with an efficiency that suggested irritation rather than hospitality. Ruth and I stood too, offering to help, but Sam waved us off with that smile again, the one that never reached her eyes. I followed Ruth to the porch, the night air cool against my skin. The cicadas had quieted, replaced by the faint rumble of a trolley 2 streets over. I slipped the envelope into my cardigan pocket without opening it, its weight settling there like a stone in still water. Behind us, through the dining room window, Sam was watching, dish towel in hand, her reflection caught in the glass beside the flowers. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes didn't leave me. I smiled anyway, slow and deliberate, the kind of smile that says nothing you can quote but everything you can feel. Because in my pocket was the next step. And the moment she found out what it was, dinner would never be this quiet again. The following Monday, I logged into my online banking just after sunrise. The kitchen was still dim, the only light coming from the thin line of gold creeping over the neighbor's roof. My cursor hovered over the scheduled transfers tab, and for a moment, I just listened. To the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking wall clock, the distant murmur of a morning jogger passing by. Then I clicked cancel. The payment to the joint mortgage account, my payment, vanished from the schedule with a single confirmation. No fuss, no ceremony, just gone. I closed the laptop and poured my coffee. The bitterness was sharper than usual, but it steadied me. By Wednesday, Ethan called. His voice came through the line low, uncertain, like he was trying not to be overheard. "Mom, the mortgage payment didn't come through." "I know," I said. A pause. Is everything okay?" "It's temporary," I told him, keeping my tone even. "You and I will talk soon." He hesitated, then exhaled through his nose. "Okay, I'll tell Sam it's just a mix-up. Tell her whatever you like." I ended the call before he could ask for more. That same afternoon, Martin's voice filled my phone, a man who didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Helen, the notice of intent to sell is drafted. I can courier it to you today, or you can come by and sign." "Have it sent over," I said. "And Martin?" "Yes? Let's move quickly." By Friday, Wes called again. His tone carried the faint energy of someone who'd been thinking about this deal more than he'd admit. "Helen, I'd like to revise my offer. Market's heating up even more than last week, and I want to secure the property." The new figure made me press my lips together to hide the smile. "That's generous," I said. "Send it over." When the contract arrived, neatly clipped in a manila envelope, it was Ruth who brought the pen. We sat at my kitchen table, the late afternoon light slanting across the wood, and I signed my name with the same looping care I'd given every mortgage payment for the last 15 years. Only this time, it wasn't a promise to keep the roof over Ethan and Sam's heads. It was a promise to myself. Ruth took the signed pages, sealing them away. "That's that," she said softly. 2 days later, the first ripple hit social media. Sam's Facebook update bloomed on my feed, posted to a wider audience than her usual filtered vacation shots. Some people will never appreciate family. Some will even try to take from you after you've opened your home to them. Grateful to the real friends who stand by us. Ungrateful, in-laws, just family first. The comments came quickly. Condolences, outrage, the odd, vague threat. I read them all with my tea cooling beside me, the steam curling into nothing. She'd told her story without details, of course, left herself room to play the victim. I didn't comment, didn't click like or share. I simply closed the laptop, the way you might close a curtain when you're done looking out. From the porch, I could see Ruth pulling into my driveway, a manila folder on the passenger seat. Somewhere deep inside, the quiet shifted, less like still water, more like a tide turning. Because soon, the notice would land in Ethan's hands, and when it did, the real noise would begin. The manila envelope felt heavier than paper had any right to. I carried it across the porch that afternoon, the cicadas sawing in the trees, and stepped down into the patch of shade between our front doors. The bungalow's wraparound made it easy to go from my side to theirs without ceremony, though this time the walk felt ceremonial all the same. I knocked once, firmly. Ethan answered, barefoot, wearing the look of a man caught between errands. His gaze flicked to the envelope before it met mine. "What's that?" "Something we need to talk about." I held it out. He took it, fingers curling slowly over the flap, like it might burn. Before he could open it, Sam's voice floated from deeper inside. "Who's at the door?" She appeared a moment later, dish towel slung over her shoulder, hair pulled back tight. The moment she saw the envelope in Ethan's hand, her mouth sharpened. "What is this?" "It's a notice," I said evenly. "You'll need to move." For a beat, the only sound was the tick of their hallway clock. Then Sam's voice hit a higher register. "Move? Are you out of your mind? This is our home." "No," I said, and kept my tone as steady as my heartbeat. "It's my home, and Ethan's, and I've decided to sell it." She laughed, one short, incredulous burst, and looked at Ethan as if to say, "Fix this. You can't just—" "We'll fight it," Ethan cut in, voice tight. "You can't," another voice said from behind me. Martin, in his pressed shirt and steady lawyer's gaze, stepped onto the porch like he'd been waiting for his cue. "The co-owner has the right to force a sale. The paperwork is already filed." Sam's eyes went wide, her flush climbing from her collarbone. "You brought a lawyer to my door?" "To my door," I corrected. Her hands balled into fists at her sides. "This is disgusting. I'm following the law," I said. "You have 60 days. Ethan's shoulders sagged, but he didn't argue again. Sam, though, looked like she might. Her lips parted, then pressed shut so hard I could see the muscles in her jaw jump. I turned without waiting for more. The envelope, now open in Ethan's hand, was between us like a line drawn on the floor. Back on my side of the porch, Ruth was leaning in my doorway with 2 glasses of sweet tea, her eyes sparkling like she'd been watching a well-scripted play. She handed me one. "Well," she said, "that's done." We clinked glasses softly. No toasts, no crowing, just the quiet satisfaction of a move played right. From inside Ethan's half of the house came the muffled rise of Sam's voice again, sharper now, tangled in disbelief and fury. Then, slam! The door hit its frame so hard the glass in my windows trembled. I took a slow sip of tea, letting the sound settle into the bones of the house, because the real shaking had only just begun. The following Tuesday, Wes's truck rolled into the driveway right on time, followed by a silver sedan with the logo of a local inspection company on the door. The air was heavy with the promise of rain, and the scent of wet earth drifted up from the garden beds. I stepped out onto the porch before they'd even shut their doors. Wes climbed the steps with his easy stride, the brim of his ball cap shadowing his eyes. "Afternoon, Helen," he said, warm as ever. Behind him, the inspector, a trim man in his 50s with a clipboard and a tool belt, nodded politely. From inside, I could hear the muted scrape of a chair and the rustle of blinds being adjusted, Sam's version of reconnaissance. "Shall we?" Wes asked. I opened the door to my side of the house, and the 3 of us moved through, the inspector's pencil scratching steadily as he noted ceiling beams, checked outlets, and peeked into the crawlspace hatch. Wes trailed him, hands in pockets, occasionally running a finger along a doorframe or pausing to admire the way the light caught the original hardwood floors. We passed the open archway into Ethan and Sam's half of the house, and I caught a flash of Sam's profile, arms crossed, chin lifted. She didn't move, didn't offer a hello, just tracked us with her eyes like she was measuring the trespass. The inspector bent to examine a vent cover. "Good airflow here," he murmured, jotting it down. Wes glanced at me. "You've kept this place in great shape, better than most I've seen in the neighborhood." "Old houses only last if someone cares about them," I said, letting my gaze linger, just for a moment, toward the kitchen where Sam stood. We moved out onto the wraparound porch. The inspector tested the railings, nodded, then knelt to look at the joinery on one of the steps. "Solid," he said. "That's what you get when you repaint and reseal every few summers," I offered. Wes grinned. "Noted. That's one less thing I'll have to put money into. I'd set a tray on the porch table before they arrived, and now I poured lemonade into 3 tall glasses. The condensation slipped down the sides, catching the gray light. I handed one to Wes, one to the inspector, and kept the last for myself. It was then I saw her, Sam, framed in the kitchen window like a portrait. Her hands rested on the sink edge, but her eyes were locked on me. She didn't blink, didn't smile, just stood there, the tension in her shoulders telegraphing all the words she wouldn't say while company was present. I lifted my glass slightly as though to toast her from a distance. Her lips pressed into a thinner line, and she disappeared from view. Wes finished his drink, set it down, and tapped the folder under his arm. I'll have numbers for you by tomorrow. Everything looks strong. I think we're in good shape to move forward fast. That's what I like to hear, I said. As he and the inspector made their way down the steps, the first low rumble of thunder rolled through the air. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint scent of ozone and something sharper: anticipation. Because storms, like sails, have their own momentum, and once they start, there's no stopping the downpour. The closing office smelled faintly of paper and strong coffee, the kind brewed for early mornings and long contracts. Martin was already seated at the polished conference table, a leather-bound folder in front of him. Wes stood near the window, hands in his pockets, looking entirely at ease, as if signing away the largest purchase of the month was just another Tuesday errand. "Morning, Helen," Martin said, rising to shake my hand. "We've got everything ready for you." The paralegal slid a neat stack of documents across the table, each page bristling with yellow flags where my signature was needed. The pen in my hand felt heavier than it looked. Wes took his seat beside me, flipping through his own copies with a practiced flick. "Everything looks clean," he said to Martin, who gave a small, approving nod. I signed once, then again, and again. The loops of my name felt steady, deliberate, like they were stitching something closed. Martin tapped the last page. "And here, this finalizes the transfer of ownership." I signed. Wes's smile was easy. "Pleasure doing business with you, Helen." The handshake was firm, the kind of grip that sealed a deal not just in ink, but in intent. Martin gathered the papers, tucking them into his briefcase like he was locking away a secret. By the time I stepped out into the bright Savannah afternoon, the weight in my chest had shifted. Not gone, but lighter. At 3:15, my phone buzzed. A deposit notification. The sale proceeds had landed in my account, the numbers clean and unapologetic on the screen. I stared at them for a long moment, letting the reality settle in. An hour later, the courier arrived with 2 cream-colored envelopes, one for Ethan, one for Sam. Formal notice to vacate, printed in precise legal language, signed by Wes as the new owner. I watched from my porch as Ethan opened theirs on the other side, shoulders tightening. Sam yanked the paper from his hands, scanning it fast, her mouth twisting. I didn't wait to see the rest. That evening, Ruth appeared with a chilled bottle of champagne and 2 fluted glasses wrapped in a dish towel. "Figured we'd toast before the next storm rolls in," she said, already working the cork. The pop echoed through the kitchen, a small, satisfying explosion. She poured, and the bubbles rose in sharp little streams. "To fresh starts," Ruth said. I clinked her glass. "And clean exits." We drank, the cold fizz cutting through the heavy summer air. Outside, the light dimmed to that soft blue-gray that comes before night, the porch humming with crickets. Later, I opened my laptop, more out of habit than curiosity, and there it was, Sam's newest post. Some people smile to your face while plotting behind your back. Some even sell the roof over your head without a second thought. But karma's a circle. Backstabbed not over. The comments were a mix of sympathy and outrage, the familiar chorus of friends rallying to her side. I read them without reaction, the champagne still cool in my hand. Through the open window I heard her voice from next door, low, sharp, the cadence of someone pacing as they spoke. Ethan's responses were shorter, quieter, as if he'd already run out of ways to soothe. Ruth leaned on the counter, watching me close the laptop. "You know she's not done," she said. "I know." Because people who believe they've been wronged don't fade quietly. They get louder. And I was ready for the volume. By the following Monday, the deed was officially recorded in Wes's name. The change was invisible to anyone passing on the street, but for those who lived under the roof, the shift in control was immediate and absolute. The first tangible sign came in the form of 2 thick, cream-colored envelopes that appeared just after breakfast, slipped quietly under Ethan and Sam's door. While I was tending to the potted basil on my porch railing, Wes had not bothered with an introduction or a friendly preamble. Inside each envelope was a rental agreement printed on crisp white paper, the sort that seemed to carry its own weight. The terms were blunt. They could remain for 3 months as short-term tenants, but the rent would be set at current market value plus an increase to account for the temporary arrangement. It was a figure that would make most people's eyes widen. Wes had also included a reminder in plain legal language that the previously delivered notice to vacate still applied, and that failing to sign the agreement would not alter the move-out date. That afternoon, I heard their reaction through the thin separation between our halves of the house. Sam's voice rose first, sharp with disbelief. "This is ridiculous! It's robbery!" she shouted, each word punctuated by the sound of paper hitting the kitchen counter. Wes's tone, when it came, was measured and unshakable. I could imagine him standing there in the doorway, his ball cap pushed back slightly, hands resting comfortably in his pockets. "It's not robbery," he said. "It's the rent for this property, for as long as you choose to stay. You can accept it, or you can leave by the deadline you were given." "You can't just—" she began, but he cut her off with a quiet firmness that ended the exchange. "I can," he said simply, and I knew from the silence that followed that she understood he meant it. The very next morning, the real transformation began. 2 white contractor vans arrived just after 8 o'clock, parking nose to tail along the curb. Ladders were unstrapped, tool belts buckled, and a portable dumpster was rolled onto the edge of the driveway with a hollow clang. Within minutes, the rhythmic thud of hammers and the high whine of power saws spilled into the humid air. The crew moved with a precision that spoke of long practice, tearing up the porch railings, stacking them neatly to one side, and stripping sections of decking that had bowed under years of weather. From my porch, I sipped my coffee and let the sound wash over me. It was not unpleasant. In fact, it had the strange satisfaction of change finally taking root. By noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Ruth. "You're missing quite the show," it read, followed by a series of photographs. In one, Sam stood in the open doorway, arms flung wide, her expression caught somewhere between outrage and disbelief. In another, Ethan leaned against the siding, head down, as if the ground beneath him had tilted too far to correct. I answered with nothing more than a thumbs-up emoji, then set the phone aside and went back to watching the workers measure and cut fresh beams. Wes appeared twice that day, clipboard in hand, conferring with the foreman and checking the stacks of new lumber. I saw him speak to Sam briefly. She stood with her arms crossed, shaking her head, but his expression never changed. After a moment, she turned and went back inside without another word. By the end of the week, I had moved most of my belongings to the small apartment I had rented above a florist's shop on Habersham Street. The rooms were modest. 1 bedroom, a narrow kitchen, and a little balcony just big enough for 2 chairs. But it felt entirely my own. The scent of roses drifted up in the evenings when the shop owner watered the displays, and the only footsteps I heard belonged to me. That first night, I unpacked slowly, placing my books in the short oak shelf by the window, draping the blue quilt over the bed, and setting the kettle on the stove. I poured myself a glass of wine and ate a simple dinner at the small table, the quiet so complete it seemed almost physical. No muffled arguments through the wall, no clipped phone calls, no slammed doors. Only the steady hum of the ceiling fan and the soft sounds of the city outside. Back at the bungalow, the hammering would continue, and Sam's voice would still rise and fall in waves of protest. But here, in this quiet apartment, that world felt far away. I leaned back in my chair, let the wine linger on my tongue, and realized I was breathing easily again. The peace was nearly perfect, until 3 sharp knocks landed against my new door, loud enough to make the glass in the cabinet tremble. By Saturday morning, the front lawn of the bungalow looked like a postcard for coastal real estate. Wes had gone all out for the open house, fresh mulch around the azaleas, a row of cheerful potted ferns flanking the porch steps, and a crisp for sale sign staked in the yard. The wraparound porch gleamed, every inch freshly painted from the recent repairs. It looked nothing like the house I'd left behind. It looked better. I didn't need to be there to know how the day would unfold. Wes had texted the schedule earlier in the week. Doors open at 10, walk-ins welcome until 3. I'd thanked him and told him I had plans. Those plans involved a cinnamon roll from Magnolia Bakery and a table by the window where I could watch the Forsyth Park fountain without hearing Sam's voice carry through the walls. By 10:30, I was on my second cup of coffee, the sugar from the icing still clinging to my fingertips. The bakery's brick walls absorbed the murmur of the other customers, and the soft jazz in the background felt like a luxury. My phone buzzed against the table. Ruth, show's started. You'll love this. A short video followed. I tapped it open, and there they were. Strangers in sundresses and khakis wandering through the house, their voices overlapping in warm, curious tones. Wes stood near the front door, smiling, greeting each new arrival. He was dressed in a navy polo and clean jeans, the picture of low-key professionalism. Over the noise, Sam's voice cut through like a clarinet in the wrong key. "We're still living here, you know. People are just walking through our kitchen like it's theirs." The camera jostled as Ruth zoomed in. Wes didn't so much as glance at her. He kept talking to a couple who were admiring the porch beams, explaining how the wood had been replaced with rot-resistant pine. Sam hovered in the background, her arms folded so tightly I half expected her to snap in half. Ruth sent another message. She's been following people from room to room. The video shifted again. 2 little boys, maybe 6 and 8, darted across the yard, leaping over the new flower beds. A woman, presumably their mother, called after them, but they kept going, circling the porch in a loop of laughter and pounding sneakers. Sam appeared on the porch steps, hands on hips, shouting something Ruth's phone didn't quite catch. The boys didn't slow down. I imagined her there, watching strangers open the linen closet, step into the dining room where she had once set the table for holidays, lean out the upstairs windows to see the park. It was the one scenario she couldn't control, the public claim on a private space. By noon, my coffee had cooled, and the bakery crowd had thinned. I took my time walking home, carrying a small paper bag with a loaf of sourdough for tomorrow's breakfast. The sun was high, heat curling off the pavement, but the shade of the park's oaks made the air feel close and green. Another buzz from Ruth. Listen to this. The next clip was all porch. A man in a wide-brimmed hat stood tracing the curve of the railing with his fingertips, telling Wes, "They don't make details like this anymore." A woman beside him nodded, adding, "You can feel how cared for this place has been." Wes smiled. The previous owner took pride in it. I knew he meant me. And though I couldn't hear Sam's voice in that clip, I could picture her in the background, absorbing every word. I reached my apartment building just after 1, the bakery bag warm in my hand. From the balcony, I could see the faint line of the park trees and hear the muffled music from a street performer on the corner. The open house would go on for 2 more hours. More strangers would pass through the rooms, admire the work, picture their own lives there. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I wondered how many would submit offers, and which one Wes might choose. Then I thought of Sam, standing watch over a house that no longer answered to her, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself smile without restraint, because the choice was no longer hers, and soon nothing about that house would be. The Monday after the open house, Savannah woke under a low ceiling of gray clouds, the kind that promised rain, but held off just enough to keep the air thick and restless. By mid-morning, Wes's pickup was parked in front of the bungalow again, his clipboard tucked under one arm. I saw him cross the porch with the quiet confidence of someone who knows time is already on his side. An hour later, 2 new envelopes lay on Ethan and Sam's welcome mat, their edges curling slightly in the humidity. They didn't stay there long. Sam flung open the door and snatched them up like she was yanking an unwanted flyer from the mailbox. From my vantage point on the sidewalk, I caught the flash of the header through the cream paper. Final notice to vacate. Inside, Wes's language was stripped of any cushioning. The closing date with the new buyers had been set exactly 4 weeks out. The property was to be delivered vacant, keys returned to his office by noon on the final day. There would be no extensions. I didn't have to imagine the conversation that followed. I heard enough of it through the open windows. Ethan's voice was low, measured, already bending toward resignation. Sam's was sharper, fraying at the edges. 4 weeks? We can't find anything decent in 4 weeks, not without paying through the nose, she said, words tumbling over one another. We're not downgrading to some shoebox apartment just because he says so. But he had the papers and the law and the buyers waiting, and they both knew it. 2 days later, I saw Ethan on his laptop at the cafe near the park, scrolling through rental listings with the expression of a man calculating which compromises he could live with. A 2-bedroom on the east side, a duplex near the river. He didn't see me walk past, and I didn't stop. There was nothing I could offer him now that wouldn't be taken as pity. That same week, I began clearing the last of my things from the storage space in the attic. The extra furniture, Robert's old recliner, the oak coffee table, a pair of mismatched end chairs, wasn't coming with me to the apartment. They'd had their years of service, their share of coffee rings and holiday wear, and it felt right to pass them along. I called the local Habitat for Humanity resale store, and 2 men in a box truck arrived by Thursday morning. They moved through the rooms with practiced efficiency, carrying each piece down the narrow porch steps and into the truck's belly. When they were done, the living room on my side felt startlingly bare, the echoes of their footsteps still floating in the air. But the space also felt lighter, and I realized I didn't miss any of it. That afternoon, Ruth came by. She stepped into the empty living room, looked around, and let out a low whistle. "Looks different without the weight," she said, and I couldn't tell if she meant the furniture or the years that had filled the space. "Feels different too," I admitted, brushing my hands together. She smiled, slow and certain, and pulled a small paper bag from her purse. Inside was a jar of her homemade peach preserves, the lid still warm from sealing. "For the new place," she said. "Spread it thick and eat it without guilt." We sat on the porch steps, sharing a bottle of sweet tea. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and something baking in a neighbor's oven. Ruth leaned back on her hands, stretching her legs toward the railing. "Freedom smells good, doesn't it?" I thought about it for a moment. The uncluttered rooms, the keys to my apartment resting in my bag, the ticking clock on a house that was no longer my burden. "It does," I said, "like rain coming after a long stretch of heat." From the other side of the porch, a door slammed. Sam appeared briefly in the doorway, phone pressed to her ear, her voice carrying in clipped bursts. She was telling someone about the impossible timeline and how unfair this whole thing is. Her gaze flicked toward us, then away again, as though we were part of the scenery she couldn't remove. Ruth's eyes followed her for a moment before returning to me. "She's still trying to fight the tide," she murmured. "Tide's not interested in her opinion," I said, taking another sip of tea. We sat there until the sky finally split open, the rain falling in quick silver sheets. I stayed on the porch long enough to feel the cool spray against my arms, thinking about those 4 weeks ticking away like a drumbeat, because once that drum stopped, the real silence would begin. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon, the kind where the light slants low and gold, but the air still feels like it's clinging to you. I had just settled into the quiet rhythm of my apartment, tea steeping on the counter, a book open on the arm of the chair, when the pounding started. Not a polite knock, but 3 hard, flat slaps against the door, the kind that announce not just arrival, but intent. "Helen!" I knew the voice before I heard the words. "Sam." I set the mug down and crossed to the door, my steps unhurried. Through the peephole, her face was flushed high on her cheeks, hair pulled tight enough to sharpen the line of her jaw. She was gripping the strap of her bag like she might swing it at the wood. "Open up. We need to talk." Her voice carried down the hall, loud enough to make the florist downstairs glance up from arranging the front window display. I didn't open the door. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she demanded, close enough now that her breath fogged the glass panel. "Throwing your own family out on the street. What happened to loyalty, Helen? To blood being thicker than water?" I rested one hand on the frame, steadying myself against the temptation to respond. She wanted a reaction. That was the currency she traded in. "You think the neighbors don't know what you've done?" she went on, voice climbing. "They're talking about it on the block. People are staring." And they were. Even here, in the quieter street where my apartment sat, the commotion had drawn attention. Mrs. Carlyle from 2 doors down had stepped out onto her porch, watering can in hand, pretending to fuss over her geraniums, while her eyes tracked every movement. A pair of teenagers slowed their bikes as they passed, circling once before pedaling off. Sam knocked again, harder this time, the blows rattling the hinge. "We took you in, we let you live there, and this is how you repay us?" I felt a sharp, humorless smile pull at my mouth. Took me in. That was her version of history. The tea timer on the counter chimed. 3 soft beeps, a domestic note in the middle of her tirade. I turned away from the door and picked up my phone. Ruth answered on the first ring. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you today." "She's here," I said, moving into the kitchen so my voice wouldn't carry through the door. "At my place." There was a pause, the faint sound of pages turning in the background. "Banging on the door?" "Yes?" "She wants you to feel cornered." Ruth's tone was matter-of-fact, the way she'd talk about a chess move she'd already seen coming. "You're not, though." "I'm not," I agreed, though my heart was drumming a little faster than I liked. Through the wood, Sam's voice pitched higher. "Do you hear me in there? Or are you hiding like a coward?" I closed my eyes briefly, then reached for the mug. The steam had thinned, the surface of the tea gone still. "What should I do?" I asked Ruth, though I already suspected her answer. "Nothing," she said. "You've already won. She just hasn't accepted it yet." On the other side of the door, Sam's knocks had slowed to single, spaced-out hits. Less fury, more insistence. "You can't just ignore me forever, Helen. We're family." Ruth's voice was warm in my ear. "Family isn't a hall pass to walk all over you." Sam's footsteps shifted, the creak of the hallway boards moving toward the stairwell. For a moment, I thought she'd given up. But then her voice rang out again, louder now, spilling into the street below. "Ask her, everybody! Ask her why she's putting her own son out!" I stepped to the side window. From there, I could see the florist, Mrs. Carlyle, and now a man from the bakery across the street leaning on the doorframe. They weren't speaking, just watching, their gazes ping-ponging between her and my dark green door. Ruth sighed into the phone. "She's playing to the crowd now." "She always did like an audience," I said, and set the mug down untouched. Sam's final knock was a flat-palmed slap, and then the sound of her heels striking the stairs, faster this time. I stayed where I was until the florist gave me a discreet wave through her window. Clear. When I finally let myself exhale, the apartment seemed even quieter than before, the air heavy with everything I hadn't said. But her last words lingered like the echo of that knock, and I knew she'd be back. The last week of the deadline arrived with the kind of heat that made everything slow: traffic, tempers, even the cicadas. From my apartment balcony, I could see the moving truck parked crooked in front of the bungalow, its ramp a silver tongue stretching down to the curb. Ethan carried the first load himself, a stack of flattened boxes and a laundry basket full of shoes. He moved with a steady, almost mechanical rhythm, his head down, the line of his jaw set. Sam, by contrast, was all restless movement. Arms flung, words clipped, her gestures visible even from a block away. By mid-morning, the sidewalk was dotted with the detritus of departure: rolled rugs, a leaning lamp, a lopsided stack of Rubbermaid bins. At one point, I saw Sam drag a suitcase across the porch with enough force to make the newly repaired railing shiver. She didn't glance toward my building, but I caught the way she jerked her hair back from her face like she was shaking something off. The sun was high by the time Wes's pickup appeared, pulling in behind the truck. He stepped out in pressed khakis, clipboard in hand, looking like the kind of man who preferred order to noise. I watched him greet Ethan with a handshake and a brief exchange before disappearing inside. When he emerged 20 minutes later, he was holding a small ring of keys. Possession had changed. Just like that. By late afternoon, the truck's ramp was gone, and so were they. The porch stood empty except for a faint shadow where their welcome mat had been. I didn't see Sam lock the door for the last time, but I imagined the sharp turn of the key, the final click. An hour later, my phone buzzed. West smooth handover. Everything's in good shape. Appreciate your part in making this happen. I replied with a short, glad it worked out. It was the truth, but the words felt smaller than the moment. The next morning, Wes called. Closing went through without a hitch. New owners will be moving in by the weekend. They've got big plans for the garden. His tone carried the same easy satisfaction as someone telling you the weather would hold for a picnic. Before we hung up, he added, Helen, thank you. Not every seller makes my job this easy. I didn't tell him it hadn't been easy at all, just necessary. That afternoon, Ruth arrived carrying a potted fiddle leaf fig nearly as tall as she was. Apartment-warming gift, she announced, maneuvering it through my narrow doorway with the skill of someone used to oversized gestures. She set it near the window, where the light pooled in a soft square. It's ambitious, I said, eyeing the glossy leaves. So was this whole business, she replied, brushing soil from her hands. But look, it's already thriving. We sat with iced tea while she caught me up on the block gossip, most of which revolved around how quickly the bungalow had turned over. 4 months from first whisper to last box, she said, shaking her head in something like admiration. After she left, I checked my phone. Sam's profile was gone from my friends list, not just muted or hidden, but erased, as though she'd decided digital distance could somehow undo the rest. No message, no formal announcement, just absence. Ethan's name appeared a few minutes later. A single text. Good luck. I read it twice, then set the phone down. There was no malice in the words, but no warmth either. Just a flat, final note, like the last move in a game neither of us wanted to keep playing. Outside, the late light slanted across the fig leaves, turning them translucent at the edges. I stood there for a while, watching them hold the sun. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed. Not mine, not anymore. The keys had changed hands, but so had the quiet. And now, it belonged to me. The cottage sat just beyond the last curve of Butler Avenue, where the pavement narrowed and the air turned briny. From the outside, it looked almost shy. White clapboard, a green tin roof dulled by salt and sun, and a porch that wrapped halfway around before ending at a weathered sand fence. The day I moved in, the tide was going out, pulling the smell of seaweed and warm shells into the breeze. The movers carried my boxes up the steps, their sneakers leaving small crescents of damp sand on the porch boards. I directed them with the same calm I'd had during the apartment move, but this time, my chest felt loose, my breathing easy. The cottage was mine outright. No shared walls, no overheard arguments, just ocean air and the sound of gulls. By the second morning, I'd found my rhythm. Coffee brewed in the small galley kitchen, its window propped open to let in the early light. I carried my mug to the porch and settled into the wicker chair angled toward the dunes. The grasses bent in the wind like they were whispering to each other, and beyond them, the sand stretched pale and smooth toward the waterline. The horizon here was different from Savannah's, open and unbroken. You could watch the freighters far out at sea, their hulls glinting as they caught the sun, and see a squall gathering before it ever reached you. I sipped slowly, letting the mug warm my hands while the air nipped at my bare ankles. Ruth arrived that Friday for her first weekend visit. She stepped out of her car in a wide-brimmed hat and a linen shirt, looking every inch like someone who belonged on the coast. "Helen, this is obscene," she said, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "I can smell the salt before I've even closed the car door." We spent the afternoon walking the edge of the tide, our feet sinking into the wet sand. That night, I made shrimp and grits while Ruth uncorked a bottle of white wine. We ate on the porch with the sound of waves folding over themselves in the dark. The air was so clean it felt like it rinsed something out of me. The next week, Martin came by to handle paperwork. He brought a slim folder, its corners sharp, and set it on the dining table. "Finalizing your updated will," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Given the new property, we'll need to adjust the language for both the cottage and the accounts from the sale." I read through each page, the legal phrasing stacked like bricks. My pen moved steadily across the lines that needed my signature. When it was done, Martin tapped the folder once. "This is airtight," he said, "exactly as you wanted." I didn't need to say it. Ethan and Sam's names weren't anywhere in it. News travels strangely in small circles. A week after Martin's visit, I was at the island market when a woman I vaguely recognized from Savannah paused by my cart. "Your son was in the coffee shop talking about you," she said, with the tone of someone delivering gossip she wasn't sure you'd want. "He heard you've moved to Tybee. Said he didn't know." I nodded, thanked her, and picked up a bag of oranges. Later, sitting on the porch with the late afternoon sun spilling over the dunes, I wondered how much of that story would get back to him exactly as it had been told, and how much Sam might edit in her favor. From her, though, there was nothing. No calls, no knocks, no pointed social media posts. Just silence, and I couldn't tell if it was surrender or strategy. One evening, a storm rolled in from the southeast, the kind that made the sky bruise and the air thicken until you could almost hear it breathing. I sat on the porch with the first raindrops spotting my sleeves, watching the horizon vanish into a sheet of gray. Somewhere behind me, the kettle began to whistle, but I didn't get up right away. The waves were louder now, their rhythm deep and certain, and for the first time since leaving the bungalow, I felt the pull of something still unfinished. Because silence can mean peace, or it can mean a tide-gathering strength just beyond the line of sight. Morning came slow on Tybee, the way it always seemed to here. The light slipped through the gauzy curtains in pale ribbons, painting the pine floorboards in muted gold. I stood barefoot by the porch rail, coffee in hand, and drew in a lungful of the sea air, cool, salted, and edged with the faint sweetness of dune grass. It filled me in a way that was both grounding and expansive, like breathing all the way to the soles of my feet. I stayed there longer than I meant to, watching a gull ride the updraft above the dunes, its wings still except for the occasional effortless tilt. No one was rushing me, no one was telling me to be quieter, faster, less. I could just stand and breathe, and the air was mine alone. By late afternoon, Wes's truck pulled into the sandy drive, followed by 2 cars I didn't recognize. He stepped out with his easy grin, carrying a basket covered in a linen cloth. "Figured we'd make it a proper introduction," he said, nodding toward the couple climbing out of the next car. "These are your new neighbors, Claire and Ray. They've been dying to meet you." Within the hour, the porch was full. Wes had brought fresh grouper. Claire carried a salad studded with figs, and Ray produced a bottle of something sparkling from the back seat. The little wicker table strained under the spread, crusty bread, bowls of herbed potatoes, a peach cobbler that still radiated oven heat. Conversation rolled as easily as the tide, touching on weather and fishing spots, the quirks of living on the island year-round. Wes told a story about a storm last winter that sent lawn chairs halfway down the block, and Ray countered with one about a pelican that had tried to steal his lunch. The laughter came easy, laughter that wasn't aimed at anyone, just shared, the kind that warms the chest. As the sun began to tilt toward the horizon, Ruth arrived in a wide straw hat, a bottle of champagne tucked under her arm. She kissed my cheek, set the bottle down with a flourish, and pulled out an old-fashioned corkscrew from her bag. "I've been saving this for exactly this moment," she said, her eyes glinting. "What moment is that?" I asked, though I already knew. She worked the cork free with a satisfying pop. "The one where we toast your independence," she declared, filling the slender glasses and passing them around. When it was my turn, she lifted her glass toward me. "To Helen, who reminded us all that you can choose peace over proximity, and that freedom sometimes comes in a set of house keys." The cheer that followed was soft but genuine, and I felt something in me loosen another notch. We drank, and for the first time in years I laughed without catching myself, without checking the room for who might be sharpening a look or a word to cut me down. It was just sound, mine, and it didn't echo back with judgment. After dinner, we carried our plates to the railing and leaned there, watching as the tide began to creep back in. The sky blushed pink at the edges, deepening into streaks of coral and lavender that shimmered on the wet sand. The ocean's edge breathed in and out, as if it too was in no hurry to let the day go. One by one, The neighbors drifted home, their voices fading into the hum of crickets and the hush of the waves. Wes left last, promising to bring over a bushel of oysters next week. Ruth lingered, helping me stack dishes in the small kitchen before she kissed my cheek and headed down the sandy path toward her car. Alone again, I stepped back onto the porch. The wicker chair welcomed me like an old friend. Out past the dunes, the water caught the last light, holding it for just a moment before slipping into night. I inhaled deeply, the salt and the cool and the faint sweetness of something blooming unseen. For so long I'd measured my breaths against other people's moods, rationing the space I took up in the world. But here, with the tide moving steady under a sky still faintly pink, I let it all in, slow, deep, without fear of interruption. When you own the roof over your head, every breath is yours.